Pride in our country stems from our love for our neighbors, our friends, and our family. It inspires the bravery necessary to protect America from threats, foreign and domestic, and it allows us to graciously welcome those who seek to uplift our communities. This is our home, constituted by the sacrifices of those before us, the strength of those who lead us, and the promise of those who succeed us. Abolitionist and poet Julia Ward Howe wrote the lyrics to the Battle Hymn of the Republic at the start of the Civil War in 1861. This chant quickly became the unofficial anthem of the United Union soldiers, a constant reminder of the future of equality they were fighting for. When sung at his inauguration parade by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, President Ronald Reagan became deeply moved, remarking, "I'm sure I speak for all Americans when I say, thank you for saying so well what all of us feel about this land of the free and home of the brave." Regarded since as one of President Reagan's favorite songs, this piece became an uplifting reminder that it takes brave men to free men.
Good morning and welcome to everyone. I'd like to start by making sure we first give a big thank you to the Tiger Squadron for that terrific flyover this morning. They got as low as legally allowable. For those I've not had the chance to meet, my name is John Highbush, and I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Thank you all so much for coming out this morning. Before we begin our formal program, I'd like to recognize some special guests that we have with us today, and I'll start with a member of our Board of Trustees, former Governor of California, Pete Wilson, and his wife, Gail. Governor. Wouldn't be an event without him. Former Congressman Elton Gallegly and his wife, Janice. Former Congressman Gary Miller. Michael Reagan and his wife, Colleen. Michael, great to have you, Michael. Dr. Kissinger's son, David. Executive Director of the Nixon Foundation, Jim Byron. Jim. And of course, a special thank you to all the men and women here today from Camp Pendleton who have helped us so much with today's celebration. This is the Reagan Library's 18th year working with Camp Pendleton to pay tribute to President Reagan on his birthday. We are honored to have the support of our fighting men and women from such a vital military installation. On behalf of everyone here, and I am sure all Americans, first, thank you for getting up at 4:30 this morning to make it, and thank you for your service. And now on to today's program in honor of the 112th birthday of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the March on the Colors, the playing of our national anthem, and the invocation by Chaplain Wayne McCrae, Captain Chaplain Corps, United States Navy.
Attention!
broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. For the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
March! Your heads with me for prayer. Our Lord and Father in heaven, we invite your presence with us today. You describe yourself as the one who is, who was, and who is to come. As you know our present, so you also know our past and our future. Your character and nature embody all of what we seek to accomplish today. We strive to honor the memories and lived ideals of your servant, President Ronald Reagan, to understand how his legacy continues to impact our lives today, and to join with others in the hope and prayer that our culture will, as President Reagan said, seek the welfare of humanity so that our grandchildren, when they look back on us, can say we not only preserved the flames of freedom, but cast its warmth and light further than those who came before us. To this end, Father, we thank you for the memory and legacy of your servant, President Ronald Reagan, and we thank you and ask you for your blessing upon our remembrance and upon our nation. Amen.
Please be seated. If I could, I'd like to add one other special guest that's with us today, Ambassador Gordon Sondland, Ambassador to the European Union. Gordon, thank you for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Commanding General of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, Brigadier General Jason Woodworth.
Thank you, Mr. Highbush. We greatly appreciate being here this morning. And let me tell you, my favorite part of this library is that you really have captured the fact that President Reagan not only loved his wife Nancy immensely, but also this great nation. Thank you. It's truly a privilege to be here with you today as we celebrate the 112th anniversary of the birthday of our 40th president. On behalf of all the Marines and sailors on the West Coast, thank you for inviting us to participate. Today, representing your Marine Corps and Navy team, we have the 1st Marine Division Band from the Blue Diamond. The Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton Color Guard, though the wind wasn't quite as heavy as it was last year, still a tough mission every day. And Marines from Headquarters and Support Battalion with us to assist and provide honors during this ceremony. In 1986, then President Reagan said during a speech at Cherry Point, "The world looks to America for leadership, and America looks to its armed forces, to its Corps of Marines." As you can see before you by these ladies and gentlemen, some things never change. Thank you, Marines. The thing Marines value most is leadership, particularly leadership during times of crisis. And Reagan's presidency was marked occasionally by international crisis and adversity. As Commander-in-Chief, Reagan knew exactly how and when to use its nation's armed forces as part of his vision to enhance American strength and reassure our allies through the use of both hard and soft power. During Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada, Marines were given the dual role of not only securing Pearls Airport, but also rescuing American university students, executing multiple missions, simultaneously leading to successful completion of the mission. President Reagan's vision was his foundation. He stuck to it. His ability to communicate that vision and lead a nation during times of crisis are what I would argue led to the success of the Reagan era. As the guest of honor, Dr. Kissinger stated in his recent book, Leadership, ordinary leaders seek to manage the immediate. Great ones attempt to raise their society to their visions. When President Reagan left office, the U.S. was postured for the Cold War's end. We had projected power worldwide through a robust military and strong diplomatic policy. Reagan's leadership exemplified commitment to the vision of the United States. Today, more than ever, cultural, regional, and generational gaps drive narratives. Modern technology allows these narratives to grow roots, and for some, that might foretell an uncertain future. But when I go to work each day and see Marines and sailors across the region on the West Coast train together to win our nation's battles and stand with purpose, I know that our values of honor, courage, and commitment have not diminished. President Reagan understood that. He spent his time in office knowing that our traditions and values would endure and will endure. And he worked to ensure the future of America for generations to come. Looking at the men and women here today, at the service members who wear the cloth of this nation, and all of you supporting them and honoring Ronald Reagan, I think this legacy is secure. On behalf of the Marines and sailors of Marine Corps Installations West, I extend a very sincere thank you to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library for allowing us to participate today. Thank you.
Thank you, General, and thank you for your remarkable years of service to this nation. Here at the Reagan Library, we are dedicated to the preservation and promotion of Ronald Reagan's legacy. There were many things he believed in, from eye-to-eye diplomacy in foreign affairs to living the American dream. In fact, in 1982, he said, and I quote, "We love this land of ours because it's a special place where people are free to work, to save, to believe, to build a better future. The cynics may call it corny, But this way of life we all cherish is best summed up in 3 simple words: the American dream. Someone else who epitomizes these things is Dr. Henry Kissinger, a man who continues to serve his adopted country, the United States of America, with remarkable commitment and incredible loyalty. Born in Germany, Dr. Kissinger's family later fled the country during the Holocaust era to the United States. He became a naturalized citizen in 1943, later serving in the United States Army for 3 years, where he received the Bronze Star. Later in life, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, as well as the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award. Following his time as Secretary of State and Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, Dr. Kissinger served in the Reagan administration as the chair of the National Bipartisan Commission on Central America and on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. It was during that time that President Reagan would have one-on-one lunches with Dr. Kissinger to discuss issues in hand, as well as group meetings in the Oval Office. The two often spoke about ways in which to end communism and the Cold War. President Reagan valued those sessions immensely, as he knew Dr. Kissinger's advice was born of both experience and a passion for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Henry Kissinger.
Let me thank John Heubusch for this very kind introduction. And let me say what an honor it is for me to speak here about a great president whom I had the honor to know for many decades. Ronald Reagan was an extraordinary human being and a hugely successful American president. As we all know, Ronald Reagan was a truth teller. And for this, he received the appellation of being the great communicator. But he rejected that title, saying, I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things. And they didn't spring fully from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation. He was too modest about the first part, but he was right about the second. Reagan crystallized much of what makes this nation great. And just as importantly, much of what makes this nation good. His core decency was irrepressible. His personality was so compelling that a deep trait of his character, compassion, went sometimes unnoticed. On the day of the attempted assassination on him, the grievously wounded Ronald Reagan recalled the parable of the lost sheep, that he, and I quote, began to pray for the mixed-up young man who has shot me, and to hope that he will find his way back to the fold. Ronald Reagan was a fierce cold warrior and an avid and insistent peacemaker at the same time. For him, America's international strength was not a national vanity, nor an end in itself. Rather, it was a necessary instrument to produce flexibility and compromise by America's adversary. His abiding vision had a moral and strategic clarity, and he refused to accept the proposition that leaders had to choose between the two. He was convinced that there is nothing which adversaries admire so much as strength, and there is nothing for which they have less respect than military weakness. But he also knew that a country that demands moral perfection in its foreign policy will achieve neither perfection nor security. President Reagan was an inveterate jester. It was his way of making it clear that he wasn't taking himself too seriously, and to keep his adversaries off balance. One story he left involved an American debating with a Russian, in which the American says, "In my country, I can walk into the Oval Office and I can hit the desk with my fist and say, 'President Reagan, I don't like the way you're running this country.'" The Russian replied, "I can do the same thing. I can walk into the Kremlin, go into Brezhnev's office and pound the table and say, 'I don't like the way President Reagan is running his country.'" And another story he used to tell was, you can always tell the communists from the anti-communists. The communists read Marx and Lenin, and the anti-communists understand it. So, Reagan, during the Nixon presidency, I was the liaison of President Nixon to Governor Reagan. And had many occasions to exchange ideas. There was one occasion in which I told him that we wanted to send, in the 1973 war, that we wanted to send planes to Israel, but we were looking for a formula to do it without bringing on a even more united Arab attack. And Reagan said, maybe the way to do it is to say, we will replace all the planes that the Egyptians and Syrians have said they had shot down. This was an awe-inspiring number and met every requirement we had for replacement, and it also wasn't exactly accurate. Reagan came to the presidency infused by his anti-communist convictions. While in office, these never wavered, but they were tempered by his enormous sense of responsibility for avoiding catastrophic war. I had the privilege of some 70 conversations with him and many other occasions to see him in action in groups during his presidency. There were three convictions that never wavered. First, Reagan believed that America was most secure and prosperous if it was the leader in shaping a stable world. Second, he believed that this stable world could not be based on American isolationism. Reagan knew that America needed to be powerful in substance and in mind to protect world order by force, if necessary. But he never glorified strength in its own name. Rather, he sought it as a means to peace. Thus, his favorite phrase was peace through strength. To this end, Reagan ordered an expansion of our nuclear capacity in the very early days of his presidency. And he supplemented it with a program that was ridiculed when it was first put forward, and which is now a standard part of our armory and that of our allies, which was the missile defense program. It is now one of the key elements, and he always justified these efforts on the ground that it would lead to peace. He was determined not to have a nuclear war. He wanted to remove catastrophic weapons from the armories, but he knew that this could never happen unless the United States possessed enough strength that it could overcome any military challenge. And as a result of these efforts, in 1987, an entire category of nuclear weapons were removed from the armories. But we, of course, were dealing with an adversary who was not always maintaining its commitments. And so this part of Reagan's efforts, while substantial, has yet to be fulfilled. But he was in the strongest position of any American president that I have seen in action, in its combination of commitment to defense and at the same time his commitment to peace, his willingness to face down challenges, and his readiness to conduct negotiations on a human basis. At his first meeting with Gorbachev, he told Gorbachev a story about a 700-pound man who went on a diet and dieted himself down to 400 pounds and could now walk from his bedroom to his living room. One of Gorbachev's associates told me that the Russians went crazy trying to figure out what he was trying to tell them and what threat he was uttering in a polite manner. And finally, one of their intelligence people found that this was a story Reagan had read in People magazine on the way to the meeting. And in a funny way, they found it very reassuring that this was a conversation that this formidable president also was talking to them on a human level, on a more substantial side. When Reagan was recovering from the assassination attempt on him, he wrote a letter to Brezhnev, who was then Russian Soviet leader, in which he pointed out that the United States' unique in the history of mankind, was ready, had never used its power to impose its preferences on others. That on the contrary, we used our power and wealth to rebuild the war-ravaged economies of the world, including the nations which had been our enemies. And he said the same option existed for the Soviet Union, and that as American president, he would dedicate himself to bringing peace, even while he was pushing the major rearmament and of our military forces. He felt so strongly about it that he even offered to share our strategic defense capabilities if we could achieve a peaceful outcome with our enemies, so that this kind of war could never happen. And his attitudes can be best demonstrated by his speeches about the Berlin Wall. In 1987, he made a speech at the Berlin Wall in which he said, I must say, over the violent opposition of its State Department, in which he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. But 5 months later, he made another speech in which he said he was envisioning the day when he and Gorbachev would meet in Berlin and start taking down the wall brick by brick, and that they would share an effort to bring peace to the world. And this even led to a joint statement by him and Gorbachev in which they said nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Of course, Gorbachev did not stay in office to be able to carry out these visions. And we have to remember that which brought us to the point where we could have them and where we could be strong enough to implement them. American leaders are often criticized as belligerent when they build defenses. And weak when they practice conciliation. Reagan transcended this divide. And he and within 10 months after he left office, the wall in Berlin came down much the same way as he had hoped, but not with Russian cooperation, but through the accumulation of American willingness to stand for its principles. President Reagan assumed office after a period of internal turmoil and international withdrawal. After years of protests over the Vietnam War and after the period of hostages in Iran and a period of domestic assassinations, he overcame these challenges with wisdom and serenity. He epitomized something that I wrote in a recent book, that great leaders take their societies from where they are to where they have never been by their vision and imagination. Today, we again suffer domestic division and international disorder. About arguments about who we are and what we stand for, we find it difficult to muster the domestic cohesion necessary to face the challenges ahead of us. In the Middle East, a hallowed theocracy is on the brink of developing the world's most devastating weapons. In Asia, Chinese ambitions as the Middle Kingdom constitute a challenge to world order. Most recently, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine shows no signs of abating. And at the same time, the evolution of artificial intelligence is transforming human consciousness itself. Each of these pressing developments requires a combination of strength and conciliation. In a recent book, Ronald Reagan was described as the peacemaker. And as president, he understood better than anyone how to integrate the elements of power and the elements of conciliation. As he said in his challenger speech, the future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave. We need his civic faith. We are too great a nation, he reminded us, to limit ourselves to small dreams. And we need his vision. In his farewell address, he described the city on the hill as he always said of our country, as a beacon, a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. It is in this spirit that I feel so honored to have an opportunity to say these words about a remarkable president, and to say that at this point, what we most need is another Ronald Reagan. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kissinger. If you all would, please rise for the laying of the wreath and the honors to President Reagan.
Honor guard! Attention! Attention to orders!
The President of the United States has directed that a presidential wreath be laid at the resting place of all former presidents on the anniversary of their birth. Brigadier General Jason G. Woodworth, Commanding General with Camp Pendleton, California, is designated to place a wreath at the tomb of the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, on 6 February 2023, in honor of the 112th anniversary of his birth and in tribute to his distinguished service to a grateful nation. Please remain standing for the retiring of colors and the conclusion of this ceremony with Anchors Aweigh and the Marines hymn.
Retire the colors!
Anchors aweigh, my boys, anchors aweigh. Farewell to foreign shores, we sail at break of day, 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 day. Through our last night on shore, drink to the foam. Until we meet once more, here's wishing you a happy voyage home. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marine.
This concludes the ceremony today. Thank you all so much for coming. Birthday cake will now be served in the Presidential Learning Center on the mezzanine. Thank you so much.